if you don't believe in the kind of God who will hear your prayers and respond and intervene in your life, 75% of Americans who don't believe in that God seldom or never attend any kind of religious service. Whereas 75% of people who do believe essentially in what would be the God of Scripture, the God,
Yes.
the all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God, yes, who would hear your prayers, does care about you, sees you, understands you, and can intervene. If you believe in that, 75% attend services on a regular basis. It's just
Wow.
that dramatic a difference.
Welcome to the Huntley Leadership Podcast, helping leaders be a positive catalyst in the people they support, the organizations they serve, and the communities they live. This podcast will make you think, laugh, and grit your teeth with new determination to make your parish or business a place of transformation, passion, and purpose. If you're still breathing, you are powered for impact.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leadership Podcast. I'm privileged today to speak with Sherry Weddell, who in so many ways is a pioneer in the world of parish renewal, oddly enough, in the sense that everyone I've ever coached has had her book on their bookshelf of great readings. And so, Sherry, it's wonderful to have you on the show today. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Ron. This is going to be fun, I think.
I think it is too. You know, it's interesting, that book, you know, Growing Intentional Disciples, it really, I've just heard it quoted so many times. It's so inspirational. It's really shone a light on something that probably so many people were experiencing but didn't have a language for. What made you write the book?
Well, that was like being hit by lightning. People keep thinking I have some kind of grand plan. And I remember one woman said, "What's your 5-year plan?" And I said, "Honey, I've got a 2-year guess, and that's as close as it comes." This is something God did while I was trying to do something else. Basically, it all, of course, everything we learned came out of the years we had spent helping people discern charisms, which involved spending an hour listening to every person just tell us their story. And one of the questions we learned to ask was, could you just briefly describe, your relationship with God or your experience with God to this point in your life? And then this stunning stuff would come out of people's mouths that most of us didn't even know was there. And that was what raised the issue of, are people, that's how we learned. A lot of them they did not understand themselves to have a relationship with God. And they made it very clear. And so that sent us off wrestling with the gap between people who could be very active in the parish, attending Mass regularly, et cetera. They had been received all their sacraments, et cetera. But the essential thing was still missing. And as they told us, they told us this. We did not presume it. We were not judging them. We were just listening to trying to take seriously what they told us instead of just, dismissing it and saying, well, that can't possibly be true. And you have to understand, so we've had at least 140,000 people as of last summer go through the Called and Gifted process all over the world. So that's the scale we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a big study.
It's a big study. And it took, years of listening to even let it in, to realize what I was hearing and what other people, because obviously there are many other people working with me on this who are listening.
Right.
And so it's so that was the core. And then we spent another 15 years trying to talk about it in Catholic circles and in our Making Disciples seminars and stuff, and got enormous pushback. People were angry. They would implode. The stories, I could tell you story to story, but people would they would go into tears. I'd have to shut everything down, take them outside, calm them down, listen.
Give me one story, like if you can, or maybe blend a couple together so you don't give anybody away. But what was it that they were so upset about?
It varied all the time. That's the thing, that every time I'd listen to one, I'd go, oh, I've got it now. Now I get it. And then the next time they'd blow up for a different reason. But what it all came back to in the end, basically, was, one true story. And this is
Yes.
happened in public, so I feel like I can talk about it.
Okay.
I started a little blog called Intentional Disciples, and within 2 weeks, it had started a firestorm across the Catholic blogosphere, on both on the right and on the left and in the middle. And as Amy Wellborn wrote it, she said it was unintentional mega blogging. And all I had done was talk about discipleship, and what they were angry about was the language, intentional discipleship. Who basically did I think I was? I was judging people. I was being elitist. I was all this stuff. And, so it became it just took over. It just went global overnight. And we just started using the language just as in desperation, just for practical reasons, not for any, it wasn't a brand. People thought I was creating a brand. I'm like, are you kidding? No, I was just trying to find a way to convey that it was something that didn't happen in your sleep. You don't become a disciple unconsciously. You don't, wake up one morning and God has zapped you or whatever. Yes. So from the very beginning, and we discovered it was fascinating because it was across all the spectrum, was the whole spectrum. So it didn't matter where you were on the ecclesial spectrum or anything. People were equally pissed by the whole language.
You really hit a nerve, didn't you?
Oh man. So I spent 15 years basically having those conversations over and over again. At all levels of the church's life as we traveled. And so when the book, of course, happened, basically an editor at OSV who had been talking to me about charisms and discernment, and I had said, well, yes, I'll write a book about that someday, but I don't have time. She wrote me again, said, Sherry, are you thinking about a book? And I said, well, I think it's time, but I've already started this thing because it was 2011, and there was a possibility we might be sharing in Rome at the conference on evangelization or whatever that was coming up the next year, and so I said, but this other thing has come up, and so I've been sort of trying to outline, basically a book along just about this, and then when I'm done with that, I'll do the Kerosene Thing, and she said, oh no. Give me everything you have. I have an acquisitions meeting in 3 hours. So basically, I took all I had was, an outline of the 12 chapters, and and I threw it together. This was 6:00 in the morning. So here I'm at 6:30 a.m. Right?
Are you a morning person, or hopefully you are? Yeah.
Sending it back to the East Coast, and in time for her meeting. And she wrote me back, 6 hours later, and said, we want your book. So that it was literally like that. My whole life revolved on a dime. It changed everything. I spent the next 5 months trying to get that out. Got it in at 6 p.m. on the due date, and then when it was published, it just went viral. And
it did, didn't it?
It sold out in 2 weeks, and I know nothing about publishing, so I kept saying, "Is this good? Is this like what?
Should have been 1 week."
I mean, I had no idea. They kept saying, "Oh, this is good. This is good." I'm like, "It's good. Okay, why is it good?" And I would go. I said, "Well, how long can I expect something like this to last? I mean, isn't this weird?" And they would say, "Oh, Sherry, this was about 6 months in."
Sherry.
They said, "Oh, Sherry, it's just begun."
Right.
So yeah, I mean, anybody who, I didn't have a grand plan. This was not my idea. None of this has been my idea all the way along. It has just been what's missing, just asking the question, what's missing? Where's the gap, the living gap between what the church is calling us to, what she says, what Jesus asked us to do, and what we're living as Catholics.
Yeah.
And so That's how it happened.
Yeah, it's so practical too, because growing up for me, I remember being 8 years old, and I kind of tell this story from time to time, but just being an altar boy, and we were singing this song, "They will know we are Christians by our love," right? And I'm thinking, this isn't true, but it's not because I didn't want it to be true, but it wasn't my lived experience, even as a young boy. It was very much like, like, don't we know this isn't true? But we all want it to be true. But I saw that gap as a young boy. I felt it. And
Though
when
I have to say, you're also from an evangelical background like me, right?
No, actually grew up in the Roman Catholic faith,
You
believe
did.
it or
Okay,
not.
somehow
Yeah.
I thought I
Yeah.
got the wrong impression. I
I
grew
am
up
an
in a different world.
evangelical person at heart, which I found out later on,
Okay.
which is part of the struggle I had as a young boy with the
Oh,
church. It's like, I don't know how to tell anybody. I don't see anybody telling anybody, and I don't know how.
yeah.
But for some reason, I had this burning passion. It wasn't only later that I found out that was one of my charisms, but
Yeah, I was going to say charisms triumph over almost anything. That's always fascinating. That's another
Even your
story.
denomination. That's right. Yeah, tradition.
But yeah, okay. Well, then that makes sense. Whereas I had been, when I became Catholic as a young adult, I was
Yes.
already preparing. I was a missionary wannabe,
Right.
preparing to be a missionary to the Muslim world, which
Oh,
talk
wow.
about something that Catholics had no concept of. And when I became Catholic, I didn't know what to do because I tried to describe what I was doing, and people just, again,
Right.
I came from a different planet. And I knew nothing about being Catholic because it was an anti-Catholic planet on top of it. Uh, so yeah. So anyway, so it's been a long, long journey and learning curve
Wow.
for me.
Yeah.
And that's why I had to listen. The only way I could figure it out was by listening to Catholics and
Yes.
say, tell me more, help me understand what it's been like for you or what you know.
Yeah.
That's how I figured most of it out.
That's
So,
so beautiful. And isn't that the whole synodal process that the whole global church has been trying to go through, is just, hey, I got an idea. We should listen to each other. It's like, hey, let's give it a try. Maybe we can't
it was,
lose. I mean, you've been
I
doing that a
was
long time.
exactly. I was trying to listen. I mean, I took church teaching very seriously. I was listening to that, and then I was listening to people just as seriously, and then
Yes.
trying to go, okay, like, how does this work? I mean,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, you were doing all this work. My understanding, you're doing all this work with helping people understand their charisms, and they didn't know Christ. It's like, oh,
that's why they're just not. They're struggling to discern. I went, oh, you're kidding me. I mean, it was
right.
like there was no category in my head for this. Why would you waste your time? I didn't understand it
Right.
all. I came from a world it was profoundly real and personal to you, or you
Yes.
just didn't waste your time. The
Right.
idea that there could be a whole Christian culture and civilization and all the riches that the church has, where a large number of people, not everyone, obviously we have great saints of all kinds,
Yes.
but a large number of people didn't have that or didn't even know it was a thing. Uh, it was the greatest discovery of my life. I didn't even know it was possible.
Well, it certainly makes sense, and maybe you'd heard before, but certainly I've heard it. The Catholic Church is a sleeping giant. If it ever woke up and stepped into its identity as baptized
Mhm.
missionaries, like priest, prophet, and king, if we ever truly stepped into that, oh my gosh, we're forced to be reckoned with. And so much
Absolutely.
of your work has really, and here's my experience of it, Sherry, is because your story kind of is the same as Father James's, is that he was trying to do something else and God had a different plan. And so,
Right.
the whole idea of writing the book, that wasn't his idea. And then once it was written, it was like, oh, we're in trouble. And we're just trying to make this church amazing and help a few other people. But this just took us in a completely different direction, including coaching and trying to help other pastors learn to lead other teams and everything. But what I kept seeing was your book convicted them. It was okay, I agree, we have a problem. But it was the first, like so many of them, like, we have a problem and here's the evidence, and it would be your book. it's like this evidence is my experience. Therefore, I agree we have a problem. Now let's go about repairing it. It's like Yahoo, because you can't solve something if we don't agree there's a problem. And I think your book uncovered that. Oh, wait a minute. This, after you dealt with your blog blowing up and all the people pushing back. So all the stuff that happened before the book was published, you'd been living it for how long?
15 years.
15 years.
Yeah. And learning what not to, learning where the triggers were, learning where the vacuums, the gaps were, and learning how to be able to talk about it in ways that got through, which was part of the fruit of that. I would never have been able to write FID without that 15 years of failure, apparent, consistent, perpetual failure. I often felt like, I don't know why you're asking me to do this, God, because surely there's someone out there who's better qualified or who can get it across, who has whatever that winsomeness or that capacity to, all those things you think, you imagine.
Are needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's, so I think the thing is, we were all having the same conversations. I think what I learned in listening to people, so many of us were up against the same I used to feel like there was this force field, this invisible force field that kept everything we were doing from hitting people, from getting through, that God's love, God's mercy, God's presence, his grace wasn't somehow hitting home. And it turned out we were all having the same conversation. Many of us were asking exactly the same questions. Yes. That's what became clear when the book came out. So I thought, well, yay, praise God. But it opened, of course, all kinds of doors. And then I got to listen to, and then I spent a lot of time listening to clergy and bishops and all kinds of people in leadership, religious and everything. When the book came out, and they all said to me, a lot of them privately, these were private conversations, obviously. And they'd say, I wasn't a disciple when I was ordained, when I took my vows, when I was installed as archbishop or whatever, or when I, began my leadership, whatever the category was. I am now. I'll tell you what happened. And then I got to hear that story, which is great. But we weren't consistently, the difference I've seen, because we just did a 10th anniversary edition of Forming Intentional Disciples, just came out, and I revised the first chapter that everybody hated with all those nasty stats, because I'm like the queen of bad news. So, but I figured we'd all pretty much figured out that part by now. So I rewrote that. And part of it was be able to say how different the conversation is now.
Nice.
10
years later.
10 years later, almost at every level, and not just in the United States, but around the world. Because, of course, the book has been translated and sold and been read in a lot of places that we've worked in. And it's like you say, it is, at least we use the J word now. We will name the man who could not be named. We will talk about Jesus and use the language and personal relationship language and all of that. And now that's become very, very common, which is incredibly exciting.
It's a big deal.
It's a big deal. Yeah.
It's a big deal. I remember doing some work with getting ready to have a conversation with a diocese. It was a big diocese. And it was we're just getting set up so you could hear what was going on in the background for them. And I was walking by trying to get my stuff ready, and all of a sudden I heard one person say, "Wasn't it great that Father so-and-so said he never talks about Jesus?" And I went, "What?" And so I go back to the screen, stick my face in the screen and say, did I hear you correctly? Did you say you have a priest that doesn't talk about Jesus? They said, "Yeah." I said, "Did you say that was great?" They said, "Yeah." I said, "I hope he isn't in ministry anymore or he doesn't have influence." "No, he's one of our most influential priests." "Okay, help me understand why that's great." "Well, because he was so honest." I'm thinking, oh, dear Lord Almighty, please help us.
No,
Like,
but seriously, I get it, because to even be able to to recognize that and be able to articulate it
yeah,
represents a big change from 10 years ago.
yes.
And so I get why they're saying that's positive, because and he used the name. I mean, and
Right.
yeah, so but yeah, prior to that, but the change has been dramatic.
It's so beautiful. I was talking, actually, one of the other podcasts, Father Pierluigi, his name was, or is, and he used to be a formator for 18 years before he took his first parish in Australia. And then he went on try to bring parish to life, and learned he's just so humble in his approach and his collaboration with the lay people. It's like, I don't know how to be a parish priest. You're going to help me. Let's do this together. And I just loved his approach. He was so honest and real. And so they went on this journey together, and there were different seasons of breakthrough. So new things were required at different seasons for breakthrough. And he's just doing amazing work. And I asked him, I said, if you went back to formating now, like if you went back into the seminary now, what do you know now that would change how you would go about doing that? And what he said, Sherry, totally surprised me. I thought, I'd teach them leadership, or I'd help them understand their gifts. And he said, I wouldn't assume they knew Jesus.
Bingo.
Whoa.
The first time I ever asked a vocation director, I won't name the place.
Sure. Yes, please.
But anyway, he was.
Yep.
I said, okay, help me understand. Are the guys who come to discern vocation, who are just beginning the discernment process, are they disciples? And he said, no, none of them. I said, well, okay, all right, blow me away, help me understand. Why? And he said, well, none of them know that that's a thing. Nobody ever told them about it. Now, after FID, the Forming Intentional Disciples, came out, I had another vocation director for meeting him for breakfast, and asked him the same question. This time he had the book on the table with him, let me know he'd read it. I said, okay, fine. I said, but what do you think? And he said, oh, no, we're very aware. We do this and this and this, because we know that relationship with Christ is absolutely central. And as we all know, of course, they've just done a massive revision of the whole formation process, and the whole years are being devoted to this now. But he said, then he went on, he said, but the thing is, none of my men knows how to help anybody else become a disciple.
Right. Well, and that's what I want to talk about next with you, because I love how you break down the thresholds. Like, again, for me, it was just this giant frustration because I could see a gap. I saw people leaving in droves in my generation. I'm 53, and so the churches were full when I was a kid, but boy, I just watched my age group and their parents and grandparents peel away from the church and not think anything of it.
Yeah.
And so I was frustrated, and then I did the craziest thing ever, and I started reading scripture, and I couldn't read scripture and not hear go make disciples. And it's like, but I don't know how. Like, I don't see anybody doing it. I don't know how. And so just within me grew this judgment and frustration and anger, and I wasn't very fun. But this was God's way of slowly waking me up and saying, Ron, I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to everybody else. Stop blaming everybody. We're in a conversation here. It's like, I thought my job was to blame everybody else. It's like, no, sit down and stop being so foolish. But I didn't have the language. I was just trying hard, but mostly beating my head against the wall and learning things the hard way. So take us through, what people can expect, because Jesus says, go and make disciples. That presupposes a process. You make a cake. You don't just open up your oven and there it is. Like, there's a process. And so what have you learned?
Oh, man. We've learned a lot since Forming Intentional Disciples came out, too. So
right. Sure.
We're constantly now, I should add, the thresholds have been incredibly useful. So we found them constantly still very, very significantly important in helping people understand that the journey is just a lot longer now than it used to be.
Right.
what I did, I just came back. I was in Australia last month, and I started off with a picture of "It's a Wonderful Life," and I said so. And it turned out I was afraid that Australians hadn't seen the movie, but it turned out younger people were all aware of it, so it was great.
Oh, neat.
And so I was able to say, well, what happens at the beginning, right? Because you're hearing all these people praying for George Bailey because he's in trouble. And Lord, oh, please help George Bailey. And the assumption was that the audience would all know that you didn't see anybody, but they were praying to God in heaven for this man on earth, and God would know and care and intervene, and they would send an angel that who was good was going to help him. And, all the assumptions. And I said, and this came out in 1946 when you could make a movie like that. Okay. But now nobody's going to make a movie like that because you can't make any of those assumptions anymore. And so and what we're finding, especially the early journey, because huge numbers of even practicing Catholics, I mean, people in Mass every weekend, when you actually talk to them, you discover they don't yet have a lived relationship with God. They don't trust God. They don't think God is interested in them for all kinds of interesting reasons. And it's so... especially we've learned it's more important than ever to be aware of the journey that people make in the 21st century. The culture has changed so tremendously, and it's never going to be you're just raised in the church and you went through sacramental prep and you got all your sacraments of initiation and now you're good and now you'll just show up for the rest of your life.
Catholic schools are making disciples.
Really true. It is absolutely totally gone.
Yeah.
And so why do people leave? Well, honey, if they don't believe, there's a direct correlation. This is brand new stuff that just came out a few months ago, a study. But basically, if you don't believe in the kind of God who will hear your prayers and respond and intervene in your life, 75% of Americans who don't believe in that God seldom or never attend any kind of religious service. Whereas 75% of people who do believe essentially in what would be the God of Scripture, the God, the all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God, who would hear your prayers, does care about you, sees you, understands you, and can intervene. If you believe in that, 75% attend services on a regular basis. It's just that dramatic a difference. And that is where most people are starting now. We want to dump all this catechesis on them. They don't even believe in a personal God. So how are they going to be able to process Jesus as God? So therefore, huge numbers of them, they think he's a good guy. Everybody likes him. I mean, almost everybody in the world likes Jesus. Even if you're not Christian or you have no Christian background, you think he's a good guy. But you don't think he's God, and you don't believe in, that he was incarnate and all the stuff about the death and resurrection, all that. None of that follows because you don't even believe in God in the first place.
Right.
And so that is so crucial. And helping people move, the thresholds that you were referring to are basically sort of 5 stages in a journey that's pre-discipleship. This is before you actually begin to follow Jesus as his disciple. It's the kind of journey a lot of people now in the 21st century are going to make, especially in the West. And that's all over the world. And wherever Western culture has reached, including parts of Asia and all of that, it seems to be applicable everywhere we've worked. And so there's the first one is is there a bridge of trust in place? Some positive association with Christianity or Christ or a church, or even just a believing Christian. Somebody who you like. You may think their ideas are nuts. You don't know why they do what they do, but you like them anyway, and they were really good to you, and somehow they're your living bridge to the Christian world, to the whole idea of Christianity, and to God and everything. And many people who would say, I'm an agnostic, I'm an atheist, I'm a nun, I'm a dun, I'm a whatever, but I have this friend, I have this family member, I have somebody who's that sort of bridge for me. And so that's the first thing, is that bridge of trust. If there isn't any bridge of trust in place, if it was destroyed, and often through trauma, or if it never existed, that's the first missionary task. You've got to build the bridge because they can't take in anything else without it. And so that's huge. And then the second sort of stage or threshold that we talk about is curiosity, which is casual curiosity. It's not will you marry me curiosity. It's like, oh, you're interesting. You want to go have coffee? It's at that level. Okay. We're not signing up for anything here. I'm not making a lifelong commitment. I'm just thinking, that's interesting. You talk about God like you can talk to God and God hears you. I didn't even know that was a thing. Is that a thing? You know? And you may be able to talk a little bit with it, and they'll go off and think about it for a while, and they go, but he doesn't seem crazy. Maybe, but he's not. Or she, so it's just that whole journey. Early curiosity is really crucial as people move. And then they become more and more curious. We want to foster their curiosity by our stories, our testimony, our life experience, just sharing as we go along. And then helping them begin to actually encounter Jesus at some levels, hearing the gospel stories, probably for many of them for the very first time. Because even evangelicals are no longer reading scripture in the way that they once did. So, and Catholics never did, really. So, and lots of other people.
Hopefully we're going in opposite directions, although we want our evangelical brothers to read it too, and sisters.
That's right.
But hopefully we're starting to come up.
Across the culture, there's, we just can't presume. We're not in 1946. Yes. We cannot presume it's a wonderful life and that everyone will understand how that story begins. Yes. And so that's part of it, helping them become more and more curious about Jesus and the faith. And then the crucial thing, what we didn't quite understand until about 5 years ago became clear, for a lot of cradle Catholics, people born in the culture, like you, or any number of people, and this, obviously there are many exceptions, but in general, I'm talking.
Yes.
What for many of them hasn't happened is they either have never experienced or have not. They may have been receiving communion, but they did not understand it as a personal relationship.
100%.
They didn't believe God was a personal God who cared about them in that way. And as we listen, now that we know to ask this question, we've changed. When we do gifts discernment, we've added a question or two to the process when we do the interviews. And one of them is, could you briefly describe your relationship or your experience of God to this point in your life? And the other is, we now say no to put in, and where is Jesus in all of this for you? Or something like that. Because a lot of Catholics, Jesus is not related to God. God is something else. As one woman, this became clear. A woman came up to me and talked to me at a conference and said, she grew up in a practicing family. I mean, these are people who are good people in good Catholic families, or the guy who was in full-time ministry, forming clergy, who'd grown up in a very committed Catholic family, Mass every Sunday, just totally committed, and said, until I read your book last month, I did not know it was possible to have a relationship with God. And I'm like, wait a second. You're in full-time ministry forming clergy. You are a highly, highly committed. This is a good guy, a highly committed, totally invested in the church kind of guy. And he says, well, we never talked about it. I literally didn't know it was possible.
Right.
That transition is really the transition into the sort of the third threshold of openness. That's what we're finding is the most crucial transition right now for almost the vast majority of Catholics. And this is true even of leadership. It's true of priests. The first time I was at a clergy day, and a couple of priests ran up to me at the first break and said, what if our brothers aren't disciples? And I'm like, oh, honey, you can't ask me that question. I said, well, first of all, I just totally freaked out because I said, I can't answer that question. I don't know. You can't ask me that question. How dare you even think about that? How you dare even raise the topic? I was so freaked out.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to say. And then I went to my Dominican co-director and I thought, okay, so let me ask you that question. What do you think about your Dominican brothers? I said, what's your experience? Right. He goes, you can't ask me that question. I can't answer that question. We both had fits over the whole thing until we realized we better start asking the question. But Yeah, it just so many of our people, when we in a place where they're safe, you've built trust,
Yeah.
they can go anywhere they want and it will be fine. There's no shame, no blame, no nothing. Wherever they are
Yes.
right now is good, because that's where God's going to meet them. Wherever they've been is good.
Amen.
So it's very positive. And we just open the door and say, we'd love to hear your story. And then this stuff comes out that just blows you away. And my best guess now, this is just rough. There's no studies on this.
Yep.
This is just a workman's,
Gotcha.
rough estimate, working estimate. I would guess about half of even practicing Catholics have not moved into spiritual openness yet and have never had a living experience of, if you will, an encounter with God that they recognized as real and personal for themselves, where they could talk to God and they knew God was hearing and respond. That making that transition is the single biggest challenge in front of us right now, since huge numbers of our people, and you can't move any further if you're stuck. And a lot of our people and even our leaders are stuck in early curiosity. When they do that, what they do is they get very entranced. All they talk about is institutional stuff.
Yep.
It's an institutional faith, and they talk Catholic gossip and Catholic insiders, baseball, and all
a lot
that
of
stuff.
devotionals,
And all that. But when you in a safe, private place, and they were able to tell you, but this is really where it is. Until that's addressed, they can't move any further. They will not grow up spiritually. They will not become disciples, much less emerge into full-blown apostleship, and that maturation process. They're stuck. And the single biggest issue right now, pastorally, and everything we're doing, like we just revamped Called and Gifted, intentionally to make it much more consciously evangelizing, because of course I presume people were disciples when I created it and thought I was helping them become apostles, and didn't know the myth. I didn't realize it was turtles all the way down. Okay, so
before you go anywhere else, I want to come back to something.
Yeah.
Did you say, again, it's a workman's guess based on, or maybe not even get, but best estimate, maybe 50% of practicing Catholic. Okay, I want to put that into perspective. You said 50% of practicing Catholics. I know just here at our parish, at St. Benedict Parish, when I was in leadership there, we had our population was 47,000 in that area. 17,000 of them were self-proclaimed Catholics. Of those self-proclaimed Catholics, about 7% actually went to Mass on a week. 7%. That means 93% of self-proclaimed Catholics are not going to church regularly.
So what you're saying is, are you talking weekly here or monthly? Because in the U.S., the standard in practice became monthly to be practicing. So I always have to distinguish.
Right. Yeah. So I don't know. So 7%. So we'd have about 1,400 people at church on a weekend. And so you're right. So every week versus once a month or what have you.
Or
so totally.
On a given weekend, if you're saying roughly 7% are at Mass on a given weekend. Yeah.
Right. And so of that percent, only 50%. And so it's not like 50% of self-proclaimed Catholics. We're talking about 50% of practicing Catholics, which is in Canada such a small number of practicing Catholics. Right. And even half of those,
it's bigger in the U.S., of course, but yeah.
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
It's which is not to say, I mean, they're there, many of them are there for very good reasons. They care about the church.
Absolutely.
They want to be Catholic, but that interior journey hasn't, in their experience, wasn't talked about. No one modeled it for them, talked about it, helped them make the journey intentionally. A lot of them don't even know it's a journey that you can make still. So,
or they're trying, and it's like, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm trying to pray.
I think if I do more stuff, maybe that'll change.
Yes.
I mean, there's all kinds of. The stories vary tremendously, of course. But,
of course. Yeah.
But yes, roughly, and we know even we've run into clergy, that's been true, religious. There's all kinds of reasons people are deeply engaged with the church, with their local parish, that kind of thing. And they're good reasons. There's all kinds of good reasons to do that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, these are, like you said, great people with great intent, 9.9 times out of 10, or maybe 10 out of 10. Like,
yeah, I mean, nobody's
are.
there with bad intent. I don't think they bother. If you had bad intent, you just walk these days. You don't hang around.
I couldn't agree
or
more.
Unless your
expects
spouse,
you to go to church.
Drags you or something. But but roughly the vast majority, to be honest, the vast majority of our practicing population has never moved into openness and beyond. And so
think about the impact that has, Sherry, on parish renewal. So that's what I do. I coach pastors and their leadership teams to bring about. And so you think about the pushback they come up against at times. That's why I always say, if we don't start with evangelization, we're going to be changing behaviors, but not changing hearts. But until we change hearts, that behavior is going to be really hard to impact.
And what's really important for leaders and pastors and everyone to understand is that we filter what we hear through our own experience and our own understanding, because that's just how human beings process stuff. And so someone could be preaching to you about discipleship, and it does not compute. A lot of it does not compute. So you filter out the stuff that doesn't compute, and you hang on to one piece of it. And so we've run into it everywhere when not only do people, make this journey, but whole cultures, the whole parish culture makes the journey too.
Amen.
As people change, as they grow in their spiritual lives, they send ripples of change out into the culture. But as the culture changes, it makes it much easier and faster for people to move spiritually. And the goal, of course, is we want to foster a culture that supports this journey and makes it faster and easier and more, you're not by yourself. You're not this weird person trying to swim upstream for reasons you don't understand. That
taking religion a little bit too seriously. Yeah.
But they're really supporting you. So,
gotcha.
If the culture is stuck in the parish of almost a typical standard diocesan parish in the United States, the spiritual culture of a typical diocesan parish is stuck at early curiosity. Almost all the leaders, that's where they're pretty much at. They haven't moved into openness yet. When more and more people make that journey, it's where we discovered the power of what we call the prayer of openness, which is one of the simplest, most powerful, universally, you can use it in almost any ministry setting. But you just give people a chance to tell God in their own words that, okay, maybe I'm not certain you're there, and maybe I don't think you care, and maybe I don't know any of that stuff. But if you are there, like I'm open, I mean, that was my turning point. When I tell these stories of people praying these prayers of openness, people come out of the woodwork. One of the major leaders that in another country that I've worked with came from a completely non-Christian, non-theist background. He was in a religious tradition that had no God of any kind, no personal God. Yeah. He started praying that prayer as an 8-year-old spontaneously in a complete void. Wow. No one around him, and his family, his friends, his culture. He just said, God, if you're there, show yourself to, or somehow, He prayed that for 8 years before he was baptized at 20. And now he is one of the foremost leaders in his archdiocese, at a lay level. Okay. But when we tell these stories about these prayers of openness, one person after another says, I did that and I didn't know anybody else. It was a turning point for me as a young adult. That was my adult conversion. I was really old. I was 20. Okay. But I was, mature and sophisticated and ready to deal with this. And, but I've had people priests say, but I did that when I was 11. I didn't know. And a lot of us, the Holy Spirit was prompting us, calling us to just open the door internally, no matter where we started. And a lot of us did it quietly and privately. We had no idea that other people were doing it. We thought it was like this incredibly weird thing that had happened to us. And in
Got to
fact,
keep it a secret.
it's a secret. But now we can actually encourage, we can give people space, uncoerced,
Yes.
free space, no pressure, nothing like that, but a space where you set the stage for it, and then you give them a chance to tell God, I'm open. And we've now incorporated that into the Called and Gifted, into the interviews that we do, all this sort of thing. And we, right at the beginning of the workshop, we've revised it all. It's all now online and all this stuff. And the first thing we do is we say, these gifts are given to you for the sake of following Jesus as his disciple, and because Jesus is going to send you to someone, and there is someone out there who is waiting for what you have been given to give, and it matters that you say yes. But I said, before we start, the main thing is wherever you are in your lived relationship with God, and you can be anywhere, okay? And we know that, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. Wherever you are, this is the moment to tell God you're open to more. You're open to whatever, because these gifts come right out of that lived relationship with God. And so we just matter-of-factly started. We do it very matter-of-factly. This is not high emotion, high energy, high cringe factor stuff. But we just say, and we give them just a moment of silence to talk to God in their own words. And then, if I'm doing it, I'll, lead in a sort of united prayer. And then we move on. But then we come back to that throughout the workshop. We come back to that in the interviews. We give them, and so we're just, because we know what has happened, what makes something like Alpha powerful, or some of the other great evangelizing experiences. Yes. It's the average person, the average Catholic who's starting back maybe at early trust. If they're not at trust, they won't show up at all to these sorts of things. But there's trust there. Maybe it's just a friend or somebody who drags them, whatever. But they will not come out disciples. It's too big a journey. Almost now, to go from trust into discipleship in 10 weeks, like in an Alpha course, that doesn't mean Alpha's not effective. That's just the nature of how we process now, because we're starting so much further back and we move more slowly. Nothing wrong with Alpha. But what happens often is that people move at least one or two thresholds. So if they can move into openness, that's a big deal. It's a huge turning point for people. And a lot of it's an area where a lot of their conflict, interior conflict, outer conflict emerges. A lot of spiritual warfare around that. A lot of prayer needs to be there for people, just to make that, because it feels crazy to open the door even a crack to the God that may or may not be there, and may or may not be good, and may or may not care about me. I mean, that's a whole new world. And it's a whole new world for the majority of our Catholic population.
Sherry, you've just, again, put words to something I've been experiencing, but I just have revelation as you're sharing that, because, of course, Alpha is a big part of how we help parishes evangelize. But I always say that people's experience on team is almost more powerful than their experience of Alpha. But that's why, because, Alpha probably brings them to a place of maybe curiosity, or maybe the beginning places of openness.
Yeah.
And that's all. And so it's coming back on team that they're just in a different place, and so they're able to receive more. And that makes so much sense.
And what you're saying, is really true. And I want you to hear, every one of those, every threshold is like a mini conversion. These are people walking into a whole new spiritual reality that they didn't even know existed.
Amen.
And so they're going like, whoa, this is like, what do I do now? I'm so excited. We confuse that with discipleship.
And the average Catholic like me doesn't have a clue what to tell them.
No, we're just going, well, now they're excited, so we'll put them to work, because that's all we know what to do, right? We put them through a retreat, got them excited.
Or we catechize them.
Yeah. We're going to get them involved. They're going to get involved, which is not bad either. But I'm just saying, it's understanding everything we do at the parish level. If I'm catechizing, if I've got people in RCIA, if I am doing youth ministry, if I am working with leadership, I am simultaneously helping them make this journey. Because this is just Sherry's very rough, and I say this publicly so I can say it here. very rough. Workers' estimate, again, no studies. My best guess in the American church, about 1.5% of Catholics are actually disciples. And that's better than anywhere else in the West. So that's not bad, guys. You have no idea when you leave this country, leave the US, in Canada, Britain, Australia, New Zealand,
Canada,
and any number of other places, Germany. I mean, we've worked in a number of places. Okay.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh. Okay. We thought it was bad. Now I know what threadbare looks like.
Oh, it's true. I love working in the U.S. and I work all over the place too. Yeah. And it's like, man, you guys don't know how good you have it. And yet it's still, like you say, 1.5% in the U.S. And so it's like, that's,
and now, but if we understand the journey, and especially that's why the turning point into openness is the most crucial thing right now, because it opens the whole horizon to more. If somebody enters, or even let's say, because and through the called and gifted, we see people moving also from trust into curiosity and then into early openness. So it's like most of the really good stuff that sort of raises this issue and gives you a chance to wrestle with it. What we can expect is that as a first go round, they will move at least one, maybe two thresholds. And every one of those is a victory. Every one of those is they're saying yes to grace. They're responding to a call of God. This is a big thing for them. But so for instance, like called and gifted might be a really great entry place because people are so intrigued by it, and it doesn't, it just draws everybody. We get all kinds of people, including non-Catholics and non-Christians and people who are below zero and all this stuff. I mean, we get everybody because they're so intrigued by the idea itself. It's very personal. Okay.
Right.
And then the other spiritual stuff comes as a surprise. But we watch people move, and then when they come out, you don't want to drop them. That's really crucial. If somebody has moved into openness, you can't just throw them back into the big Catholic ocean and hope they won't drown, because that's really important. They have now moved beyond the norm of the community, beyond the norm of almost all the Catholics they know. And we can't just leave them there. If it were me, I'd probably, people post called and gifted, it's often really good that they go into something like alphas or a charismatic experience where you can grapple with who Jesus is. But now you're starting from, I just got a sense that there really is a God who cares about me. And so now I have somewhere to connect all the stuff we're telling about Jesus. And that he isn't, as one person told me, well, God is this nasty rule enforcer, but Jesus is my friend. And I said, well, wait a second, how does that work? How can that be true? She says, well, that's simple. Jesus isn't God. So Jesus can be my buddy because he's a good guy. But God is something totally other. And if we don't help people move past the I can't trust God, which usually in their mind amounts to the Father, okay? We know it's the Trinity, but you know what I mean? Okay.
Yes, I do.
We don't help them address that. They're stuck permanently. They will not move beyond early curiosity. And you can send them, that is what has to be addressed. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. It could be all kinds of retreats. It could be all kinds of evangelizing events. It could be something as simple as a called and gifted. It could be, there's a whole lot of ways people make this journey.
Yes.
But we have to understand that's the great question right now. At the parish level, at the university, at the campus ministry level, even at the diocesan level. A lot of our leaders haven't made that journey yet. And that means huge parts of, even though they go to seminary and all, huge parts of the tradition don't resonate. Because that foundation isn't quite there yet. It can happen really fast, but people need a lot of support, a lot of prayer, a lot of spiritual warfare happens around that transition.
Say more about that for if somebody's listening and they're like, okay, I understand what you said so far. Hold on, spiritual warfare? What do you mean?
It's
Now I know what you mean, but
because as you
describe it.
get close, as you become more and more curious, and maybe you're curious now, getting curious about Jesus, and you're getting closer and closer to this crucial transition point, a lot of interior anxieties rise up because inside, yeah, I'm not making a commitment, but I am opening a door to who knows what. And only God knows who might come through that door, right? And what I might find. So that's high. There's a lot of anxiety about that. It may feel really crazy. It may feel like you're almost throwing yourself over a precipice of some kind. On the other hand, people around you start to notice something's happening.
Right.
It starts to become, you're just asking different questions. You've got different priorities. You're doing weird things. You're saying weird stuff, and people go, what's with my friend or my sibling or this person I'm close to? And they unconsciously start putting pressure on you. And this can even happen if the majority of Catholics are back, say, at early trust, and that's where the majority are, even those who attend Mass.
Yes.
And you move beyond that. There's all kinds of subtle ways that people, by the questions they ask, by their physical discomfort, when you talk about things or raise certain issues, they let you know you've said something wrong, or that's how it registers with you. You feel like, I don't know, people are acting weird and they're uncomfortable, and am I doing something wrong here? And it just raised. So there's external anxieties that rise in relationships. And I think, to be honest, the enemy is using all of this to, just magnifying it.
Pull you back.
To pull you back so that you will not persevere in following. And we have to be aware of how tricky this is and how much support people need. This isn't primarily yet a catechetical thing. Catechesis comes into its own when you're much further along on the journey.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
But this is more accompaniment. We call it being an Ananias, like the mentor that God called to mentor St. Paul before he was baptized, through that whole conversion process. And, but it's just to be, and we train people. We have a whole Ananias training about how to help people, just ordinary Catholics, become low-level evangelizing companions for people, especially these early transitions. And without freaking out, and if you realize something's happening to someone, you'll be encouraging and going, wow, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that fantastic? Instead of,
right,
what's wrong with you? You're making me uncomfortable.
Such a helpful conversation. I'm learning so much. So what's threshold number 4?
Threshold number 4, if you move into openness, threshold number 4 is what we call seeking. And that's a transition into openness. If you become more and more open to God, to the possibility of his loving, life-changing presence, and then you become more and more curious about Jesus, which of course if they're going to be disciples, they want to wrestle with him. And perhaps they're reading scripture now, and they're hearing the kerygma and all this sort of thing.
Going to church.
And they're grappling with, well, do I believe that? What is that? Well, wait a second. What is that? I've never heard that before. What does it mean for me? Do I think that's real? Do I believe that? And what am I going to do about it? That's a whole nother journey. Yes. And that's what people it's seeking. That's when catechesis comes into its own. Ideally, if you're an RCIA, if you've just moved into seeking, that's the time you should move into the formal catechumenate, because now they're going to cover all the theology that is now, it's going to make sense to you because you're asking the questions it's an answer to.
And you're open to the answer.
You're open to the answer.
You trust the source of the answer.
You do. So it's a totally different thing. If we're just dumping lots of, doctrine on people who are back, as we often do, who are back at the very early stages, they can't take it in and they can't wrestle with it. And so that seeking is that now I'm wrestling for the first time with, maybe I will follow Jesus as his disciple. I'm not made a commitment yet. I'm thinking about it. Um, I'm thinking about it, but all this needs companionship. We need to be forming, and regular Catholics, walking with regular Catholics. Obviously, a pastor cannot do this all by themselves.
No, right?
They're not supposed to. Um,
Impossible.
It's impossible. It's impossible. And our parishes, especially in North America, are big and they have thousands of people in them. And it's impossible. So, but they're just ordinary Catholics can do that for one another. And walk with each other through this. And then there's that moment where the person who's thinking, you can think of seeking, it's like I'm thinking about getting, I'm thinking about getting engaged. I'm at the, this is no longer casual curiosity. Now it's intense curiosity. This is getting personal. This is going to change my whole life. And when I'm going to change my whole life, and I'm going to commit to you. I mean, that's what you're wrestling with at that stage. And then helping people, of course, we call it dropping your nets, but just to use a biblical image, but it's basically the process of helping someone in whatever way, is appropriate for them to say yes to Jesus, to walking with Jesus as his disciple in the midst of his church, and beginning what the church calls the second and lifelong conversion. So the journey isn't over. You're not done, but now you've gone through the preliminaries and now you're beginning the primary journey. And the thing is, of course, as you and I know, the vast majority of our people, even the majority of our leadership, has not yet made that journey. And that changes everything. Because what the thing is, in our situation, we're no longer in Christendom. Everybody, I think, recognizes that now. We're in a whole new culture. We're in what I call it missiondom. People have different language for it, but it's just
like that.
We're in a totally different cultural world. In that setting, being a disciple is going to feel like swimming upstream all the time. And you have to know that you have to be like a salmon that's spawning. You have to have a goal. You have to know it's important. You have to want to, to swim upstream. So it's, so basically the difference, the thing that we talk about this in Making Disciples, but I didn't put it in the book, FID. But after discipleship, there's the issue of growing into being apostles, to be basically men or women, mature Christians who are men or women for others, who are generative, who are discerning God's call, are answering that call, discerning their charisms, providing leadership in all different levels of the church's life, taking and creating the new opportunities, taking the apostolic risk. And every generation, the church either sinks or swims, depending on the percentage of her people who become full-blown, mature Christian adults or disciples or apostles. And in times,
and that was the work you were originally about, wasn't it?
Yes, and that was what I was originally about. In times of revival, and we've seen enormous times like the Great French Revival in the 17th century, extraordinary number of Catholics from every background and no background, poor, uneducated, lay, married, single, religious, priests, nobility, bishops, the whole, across the spectrum, enormous number of apostles, full-blown, mature apostles emerged. At the same time, they had different calls, different vocations, different charisms, different life experiences, but they were collaborating with each other. They were supporting each other. They were stealing from each other. They were, it was just, they were just playing off each other and supporting each other and knew each other. And together they transformed the French Catholic Church after 32 years of religious civil wars in which 20% of Paris died. I mean, we're talking stuff we haven't even begun to dream of. The horrors they lived through. And out of that came a tremendous revival that changed the course of the French Catholic Church for 150 years and through that influence, spread the faith to Canada, to Southeast Asia, all those places. And basically, in many ways, they created the world we now take for granted out of whole cloth. So many of the structures that we take for granted, seminaries, retreat houses for the laity, and I could go on and on. I've got a whole history library on the subject. But the point is, we have seen great revivals happen in the Catholic world.
Yes.
Okay, they weren't instantaneous,
Mm-hmm.
but at the heart of it, in every situation, especially in heart, when Christendom, they lived in the shattered Christendom that was destroyed by religious civil wars. Okay, what enabled them to emerge was the emergence of all these disciples and apostles who were it was the most intensely Christocentric time that the French Church had seen in hundreds of years. They were extremely Christocentric. They took everyone's vocation seriously, and there was an enormous renewal. The renewal of 4 places. The local diocesan parish was seen as a place of mission. Lay people were seen as disciples and apostles in their own right. There was a total renewal of diocesan priesthood, and there was an incredible renewal of religious life. And it all, so there were 4 cores to this revival.
There must have been some saints come out of that time. Who were the saints that came out of that time?
Oh, well, Francis de Sales would be the first, the great figure, the first generation. St. Vincent de Paul, of course, Louise de Marillac, St. John de Chantal. And then there's a lot of people who I love their stories, but most people aren't aware of them. Barbe de Carré, et cetera, who just had phenomenal impacts on so many people. Barbe was just a housewife. She was a married woman and a housewife. When she died, one of her priest friends said she was personally responsible for 10,000 conversions. He said because she just liberated grace just by talking to people. And he said, and this was true, including of many priests. She was instrumental in their conversions as well. So I'm just saying, we've seen it before. It's not like, the evangelical world did not create this. They didn't invent it. We did. They got it from us. Okay. And we have seen it happen before, but helping people make that journey is where it's got to start. Oh. And for us, of course, right now, the crucial piece, I think, is helping people move into openness when suddenly this whole new world opens up of relationship with a living God who cares about you. And everything now starts to make sense. And it's this whole new horizon that is for people who are involved in the church. That's where our big horizon is now. For people who are way far away, what we call far evangelism, the big horizon is pre-evangelism and building those structures of trust, the bridges of trust, and fostering early curiosity is really the crucial thing for them.
Sherry, this has been such an amazing conversation. I would love to have you back because I want to talk about the Catherine Siena Institute, and I want to talk about, there's so many things I want to talk about that we haven't talked about, but I think that's a really neat place to wrap up. And if those of you that are listening, boy, I hope you listen to this podcast with some friends and pause it from time to time and talk about what you've heard, ask questions, discuss it, beat it around, because I found this such an incredible conversation. I'm going to do the same thing with this podcast with my friends, because it has been such a practical, insightful, wise learning, all born out of listening.
Yeah. And that has been that, when people ask, I say almost all of it came from listening. Listening to God, listening to the church's tradition, and then listening endlessly to real people. Yeah.
Thank you for all you're doing in the church. I believe that this is a revival that's happening in our generation. When I see people like you, people like Father James Mallon, people what Patrick Lencioni's doing, and so many others are doing, Dave Nodar, just so many people working so hard with this heart, with this passion that you speak of. And anyway, thank you so much for being with us today. That was a lot of fun.
Oh, well, it was great. It was great to have the conversation. And can I just mention one more thing? Just
please, I'd love to.
Well, if somebody's interested, we do have a 24/7 Facebook Forming Intentional Disciples forum. that's open to anybody. We do ask you to apply. We like to get a sense of your background, but we have over 12,000 people on it. And this is all we talk about 24/7. It's 10 years old now because I was asked to do it to support people who are reading the book.
Yeah.
But it's this, and we talk about this at every level. We have people from all over the world, but talking about this at every level of the church's life. So you'd be most welcome. It is one way. It's a small way. We're trying to replicate some of the dynamics of the generation of saints, the Great French Revival, and giving. So there's a place to have. It's a one of a kind, so far as I know, conversation.
That's a great way to connect.
So it's the Forming Intentional Disciples Facebook forum.
There you go. So you guys head over and join the conversation and network and meet some great people that are wrestling with these same principles. I think there's a great energy that the Spirit unleashes when we are with other people that share this common passion. And so thank you, Sherry, for all the work that you're doing. And I look forward to having you on again soon.
That would be fun. Thank you very much, Ron. It was great.
You're welcome. And thanks for listening, everybody. God bless you, and we will see you next time.
I want to encourage you, as you lead this week, be faithful to God and generous to others. See you next time, and remember, if you're still breathing, you are powered for impact.